Weaving storytelling into your build can turn your house into a true home. But how do you tell powerful stories without words? Let's see how we can make the history, culture, and personality of the characters who live there come alive. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, then Housing in WoW gives us entire novels to work with. The story that I want to tell is one for Genn and Mia Greymane. Before we dive in, take a moment to look around the room I've built. What stories do you see here? Where are we? And what does it tell you about these two characters? Where would you start if you were tackling this room? I started with location. It really is the anchor to any story. It sets the mood, shapes the culture, and tells us what kind of people live there. This is my first tip. If you want to capture the feel of a WoW location, go visit it. Even with screenshots or memory, you'll be amazed how many things you might notice that you didn't remember or never saw in the first place. Let's go look around. The first thing that struck me about Gilneas was the architecture. The tiled Forsaken plum roofs, peaked windows that look like deep Angora green, softer peaks for the orange glowing windows, navy and maroon awnings, cobblestone streets, and buildings made of a mix of brick, plaster, and heavy wood. Everything is muted, damp, and a little worn, giving an old world Cockney feel. As I wandered around town, I found so many decor items I recognized. The saddles and barrels, the pitchfork, all the Gilnean wood. The laundry is here. Finding this picture was a surprise. And even all these potions and bottles are Gilnean in origin. These are details I would never have noticed without being there. Getting specifics for Genn and Mia was important, so I also visited the Greymane manor. The graveyard out front, the heavy wooden doorway, the amazing stained glass, the incredible chandelier, the deep red wallpaper, and the dining room paintings. They tell a story of the king and queen who live in this house, and an opulence that has been deserted for a long time. Fun story about the impact of actually going and visiting a place. I submitted this build in a Wowpedia competition, and these chairs were pointed out as a bit off. But one of the judges had taken the time to go visit the Greymane manor and recognized them. I wouldn't have added them without visiting, and likely no one would have realized without them taking the time to visit as well. Sometimes you just can't beat in person. What stood out to you from the Gilneas tour? For me, the stained glass window was the heart of the room. It felt like the perfect focal point. This is my next tip for storytelling. Find a focal point. I built a custom layout around it, and if you're curious, here's a quick look behind the scenes. The key components are the rug, Gilnean stone fences, and the lighting. I borrowed the cane design from the manor stained glass, and this is where the fences come in. The trick is using scaling to change their length. When you sink them into the wall, their overall size disappears, so scaling just gives you adjustable lines. The gold outlines come from the ornate ochre windows, which add variations to the light, like sunlight catching different parts of the glass. I also wanted to capture the rays that pour through the Gilnean windows, so I used the Mechagon hanging floodlights to create that soft directional glow that also moves. Obviously, the stained glass windows weren't going to carry the Gilnean feel on their own. That leads to my next storytelling tip. Explore the decor catalogue with culture in mind. There isn't a Gilnean or Worgen filter, but search terms do work well. Looking through the catalogue is good, but actually playing with decor is better. That's the next tip. Get to know your decor. To really understand the decor I was working with, I created a small test room where I could throw objects around. Rotate them, sync them, lift them up, see how they behaved. This kind of hands-on experimenting helps get you familiar with the details of each item. It makes it easier to recall later when you're looking for that perfect shape or detail for customized objects. I'll go into more detail on this later, but you can see the results of the experimentation all around this room. While there are a decent number of Gilnean items, there's only so much in the way of basic furniture. Most of what you see here is custom built or kit bashed. Being familiar with the parts meant that I could tailor the room to just the Gilnean feel that I was looking for. If you've been paying attention, you might have noticed something. There are some very clear Night Elf influences woven into this build. It wasn't an accident. Instead, it leads us to the next area of storytelling that I want to explore: the characters who live there. To truly tell a character's story through a build, you kind of need to know their lore. And if you're like me and decide to build a room for a character that you don't actually know, it's research time. I spent an hour or two digging through Genn and Mia's backstories. For you to understand this build, it is helpful to know the basics. But instead of putting you through the same 2-hour process, I'm going to sprint through it as fast as I can. Lore experts, I'm sorry in advance for everything I'm going to butcher. Here goes it. Gilneas, King Genn, Queen Mia, no shade if you didn't know she existed, and their kids Liam and Tess. Gilneas decides they don't need the rest of the Alliance and builds a giant wall to keep the threats of war, Worgen, and Forsaken out. Spoiler, the wall does not work. Genn gets bitten and hides it for ages. Liam gets killed by Sylvanas. Genn tries Gilnean alchemy to cure the Worgen curse. It doesn't help. More people turn into Worgen. Genn finally admits he's also a Worgen. Awkward? The Forsaken take over Gilneas. Genn befriends some Night Elves who use Moonwells to help the Worgen control the curse. This helps, but there is no cure. Because Sylvanas sacked their town, the Gilneans moved to Teldrassil. Sylvanas burns that too. The Forsaken have now stolen 2 homes from the Gilneans. During the burning, Mia's a complete badass, helping with the evacuations, and Genn has to drag her out to save her. He's not losing more family to Sylvanas. Recently, in Dragonflight, the Gilneans were finally able to return home and begin rebuilding. Through various stories, we learn that Mia supports Genn, but she is absolutely her own person, like attending the almost wedding of Turalyon and Illyria, even when Genn didn't want to go. And that's the lightning round version. Now we know who they are, let's see how their history, their losses, and their personalities shaped the choices in my room. Because Genn is the more well-known character, and easy to represent visually, I wanted to make sure Mia had a strong presence in the room as well. One of the simplest ways to do this is through color. I started by looking closely at her character art. She wears deep teal blue with copper accents, and an amulet that has a gem that happens to be close to the same color as the stained glass window that already caught my eye. Those colors became my anchor for Mia and the room. I struggle with color choices sometimes. I can pick 1 or 2, but I don't always know how to bring it together well. I had the red of the wallpaper and the green of the window, but what about everything else? It was hard to find something that felt right. Using Mia's colors helped me infuse her presence in the room and land the Gilnean theme. Everywhere Mia's influence appears in the room, you'll find that deep blue. I couldn't match her exact shade, but the Nazjatar navy was the closest, and it pairs beautifully with the red wallpaper. The blue and copper together also echo the colors of the Gilnean flag. This meant that weaving in her personal palette also connected with Gilnean culture. We don't know a lot about Mia, so this is where I took some creative license. She lived in Darnassus for years, and I imagine that when she returned to Gilneas, she might have brought some of that influence with her. Perhaps something restorative, like gardening. Gilneas is famous for its roses, and we have Night Elf themed blooms. So I wove these 2 ideas together. Mia's gardens reflect both Gilneas and elven culture. And whenever you see gardening touches throughout the room, you'll also see Mia's colors woven in. It's a quiet way of saying, this is her place too. Genn's story has a lot of big notes. The most obvious part of his identity is that he's a Worgen, and sometimes a very ragey one. My goal was to represent this without it dominating. To do this, my visual motive was scratches, like a raging Worgen would make. This is another tip. Find a visual element that symbolizes your character that you can carry through your build. In this case, all the furniture that belongs primarily to Genn has visible scratch marks, while none of Mia's does. When I invited my friend Talani over to take a look, she pointed out that the scratches might be too subtle, so I added some more distinct ones around the room. I kept the colors close to the surfaces they're on, because for me, the story here is that Genn and Mia have lived with this for a long time. Scratches might remain, not fully patched up. An acknowledgement and acceptance of who Genn is, and how Mia supports him. Along with the Worgen Rage, we have the struggle to manage the curse. You'll see remnants of those early attempts around the room. They're still renovating, so maybe they haven't fully gotten around to moving them. Instead of potions, we know that Genn has learned from the Night Elves how to manage the Worgen curse. I imagined that he might want a way to do this without constantly travelling to Moonwells, so I added a small one of his own. He'd probably still need to go visit a real one, but maybe this keeps the rage at bay for a time. I'm taking a little bit of creative license again, but it worked for the story I wanted to tell. Within the Moonwell, I added black smoke from the sconces. You can also see it reflected in the mirror. To me, it suggests that these objects were linked to Genn's anger, or memories of anger, and so act as an additional visual motif. Another great tip from Talani here was to layer the sconces so that the black smoke was more visible through the Moonwell, and it definitely made a difference. The garden behind the Moonwell is a reflection of my building process. I think building processes are quite personal, but my tip is to allow the objects you place to inform your build. When I'm focused on storytelling, sometimes it becomes obvious what needs to be added. In this case, I needed something to fill the space behind the Moonwell, and I thought about a garden. That led to blending the Gilnean roses with the elven blooms. I connected this to Mia, which turned into her gardening story. Storytelling in housing isn't always linear. Sometimes you're inserting the story into the build, and sometimes the build is telling the story back to you. The big story elements set the tone, but it's the small details that makes a room feel lived in. These are things that a casual viewer might miss, but if they do notice them, they add so much depth and meaning. And if it makes you happy, that's what it's all about. One of the defining realities for Genn and Mia is loss. They've lost their son, they've lost 2 homes, they have lost many of their people. I wanted that to be present in the room even though it's not their whole story. So I looked to the smaller details. You may have noticed the picture beside Genn's bed. Does the image look familiar at all? Earlier, I pointed out the gravestone design at the manor, and it's also the design used for Liam's gravestone in the Reclaiming Gilneas story. And if you play a Worgen, you return to place a vase of peace bloom flowers there. I recreated a version of those flowers in the picture, and on Mia's side of the bed, the same bouquet appears in full. These details add life to the room and share their backstory. Mia also has a picture beside her bed. It uses the colours similar to those in the Gilnean Manor paintings and shows burned trees by a riverbank. Kind of like Teldrassil. I think that this is the type of painting that Mia might hang. It acknowledges their loss and history and is still just one part of the room. The destruction in the picture contrasts with Mia's story in the room. She's gardening, bringing life back into the world through plants. It's a way of showing that she and Genn are doing more than surviving their losses. They're restoring their way of life. Other small details help round out their lives. Genn has an inkwell for his correspondence, as he still carries Alliance leadership responsibilities. There's a tiny ship's wheel referencing his role in the voyage to Nazjatar. Mia has cosmetic bottles from the elves, and her brooch rests on an elven pillow. Maybe a gift from a visit to an elven celebration when Genn was feeling too moody to attend. Her gardening tools appear throughout the room, and tucked into the bookshelf is a Gilnean celebration keg, a reward from the Reclamation questline. Even the antlers give a nod to a Gilnean hunting tradition, though I imagine these days they're displayed more for heritage than for sport. These details show us how you can use small objects to whisper of bigger stories. I like inviting people in and seeing what they notice, and perhaps causing them to ask, why? What's this doing here? Think about what your characters have lived through, what they carry with them, and what they choose to keep. These stories can fill the room with narrative. With the character stories in place, the final step was solidifying the furniture that supports those stories. The overall foundation is Gilnean, with a few intentional Night Elf touches woven in there where they make sense. The dresser is a good example of this blending. It brings in Mia's flowers, has a Gilnean wood base, and uses Night Elven silver for the drawers. A whole bunch of their history and present in one object. The bed is an exercise in creative problem solving while storytelling. An elaborate bed seemed befitting of the Greymane's rank, but nothing in the existing decor really fit. This bed has a table for a base, curtains for a luxurious cover, and then many workarounds to hide the table and fully create a bed. Storytelling isn't just what you see, it's also what you disguise. The transferable lesson here is that supporting furniture doesn't have to come from the catalogue. Think about what your characters would own, what materials their culture uses, and what colours or motifs matter to them. Then look at the decor catalogue not as a list of finished items, but as a collection of shapes, textures, and colours you can rearrange. Hide the parts you don't want, recolor pieces, and layer objects so that you can turn basic furniture into something that feels custom made for your story. We've looked at how place, culture, history, and personality can tell those many stories without words. And now I'd love to hear what stories you're telling. Share your ideas in the comments. It's always great hearing what you're working on. I love storytelling so much that it also drives my Gilneas house. You can click on the video on the left to hear the story, or maybe you'd prefer this other video. Do the like and subscribe thing if you'd like. Thanks for visiting, and see you later.